Hey everybody, so I am back today to continue this series on painting of these skeletons, and today's video will be about base painting. A good portion of the video that I'm going to start with is going to be about mixing paint, just in how I do it and the products that I use, and I'll talk a little bit about what I've used in the past and things too. So what I've found with mixing paint is that every paint product is going to be a little bit different as far as how it's best mixed, my personal experience, to some degree what things I use to mix and to dilute it down, how much it's going to need. And so at best it really is something that takes experience, and you kind of learn by using products and how to tailor it. But with that said, I'll mention that like I've been saying in the previous videos with priming, we want to preserve detail, and so I do prefer the method of thin coats, and if you have to do more than one, then so be it. I'm not a chemist or chemical engineer. I know I've heard people that talk about paint in detail at a level that I'm not prepared to, but so I'm going to speak in sort of layman's terms of my understanding of things, and people can correct me in the comments too. I'm happy to learn through this process. But basically, a paint, is pigment, and it actually is contained in a vehicle of some sort inside, that forms a suspension. And so, when you want to apply paint, you want to dilute it down, and in diluting it, you can run into issues, or at least I have, and that is, you may have experienced this yourself, where you maybe use water, which is an acceptable medium for acrylic paint because it's generally has a good percentage of water in it. And you put water in there, and then all of a sudden you end up with this sort of formulation where it's got your color, but it kind of seems like it's separating, and when you put it on the model you get almost like puddling of texture in spots, and then just sort of barely covering in other spots. It's sort of basically, in my interpretation, the vehicle that is meant to keep it as a continuous color is broken up because you've diluted it down too much. And so one of the ways of avoiding that I've learned is by using a proper thinning medium for paint. Now in this case, this is for acrylic. This is Liquitex, and you can use this and put it directly in your paint, and the paint kind of goes into it. And I found that it dilutes it down, but it doesn't dilute it down nearly as fast as water, and it has that it is that vehicle that you would use to suspend paint. And so it's a really good product. Now sometimes you want to be able to thin it even further and get good flow and coverage on the model and not have it to be as thick, and a good product that can enhance that is by the same company, Flow Aid. Now this is the concentrate, so it's not what I actually use to put on the model. I just have a bottle here. You have to follow the instructions, and it's like 1 drop per 20 drops of water. I look at the instructions, from what I remember, that's pretty close. It's a very dilute solution, and even in that dilution, this stuff's really powerful. If you use too much, it does, for me, what I described before, where it breaks up the paint, and basically that the pigmentation can't stay uniform within the liquid anymore because you've really broken it up with this. So it works great to really cover and make the paint flow consistently and thinly across the model. So I think it's a great product. But if you use too much of it, I found that it's like doing what putting too much water does, but on steroids. That's just my interpretation. So these are things that you want to mix around with. For those that you like to airbrush, many folks do recommend this sort of combination with paint inside your airbrush at various ratios, because it seems to work really well. With that said, I've had some products where it seems like there's so much pigmentation and it's so thick that I use straight water and it comes out great. And so I really recommend that you have to practice with these things to try to get the balance with the products that you're using. Today, for these skeletons, I'm primarily going to use this Screaming Skull by Citadel. I find it's a nice kind of bone color to start with for a foundation. It is a layer paint by Citadel. I'm not going to go into all of Citadel or Games Workshop's types of range. To be honest, I don't always use it according to their system. A layer, in my experience, is a bit thicker than even a base paint, just slightly, and so I know that I mean, I do dilute this down, you know, I will always, generally, unless I'm dry brushing or something like that, and that's for another video. But anything where I want to get good coverage and, you know, get paint across a model thinly, and it's a layer like this, I'm going to dilute it down. So what I will do is first mix some up right in front of you, and then I'll do some painting, and I'll likely speed up the camera after I've done a little bit, and you get the idea. And for the other colors on this skeleton, for a base paint, I'm going to start with, I'll use Mechanicus Gray by Citadel as well. This is like a base paint for the rock that he's stepping on. I'm going to use Lead Belcher for the shield for the first base coat. I'm going to use by Vallejo Model Color Bronze for the handle, the hilt of the sword, and Lead Belcher as well for the base, for the blade. And then just some details like on the shield where he's holding the straps, I'm going to use snakebite leather. So, but for now I'm going to concentrate just on mixing the paint and getting the skeleton itself painted. So I use one of these palettes here. Everybody uses something different. I saw on YouTube somebody cover it with foil because you dirty these things up, and I got tired of cleaning them. And so I just find using some foil and recycling it to be really a big time saver. So I'll start with getting my layer paint. I'm only going to do one skeleton on camera. I'll try to move this in so you can see it a bit better once I have the paint in the pot here. So you can see that's my base paint. Now I'll just take some matte medium, and literally, I don't do this really very scientifically. I'll just kind of I'm just going to put an equal amount. Just through experience, I know that that's probably going to be fine of that. And to be honest, there are times when I put drops of my solution for the flow aid in. I guess I'll do one drop for this. Sometimes when I have a really small amount of paint, all I do is wet my brush in it, because it's actually that potent that if I just wet my brush in it, or I put a little pool in another spot on the side and occasionally dab my brush in it, it actually works really well just to sort of give it some flow. This is I know with experience that this is a fairly thick paint, so by just putting a small drop in here, I know a drop's supposed to be a standard size technically, but there we go. And so now I will just mix this up. Even this, you can kind of see as I'm mixing it, it's starting to lose separation a little bit in some spots, just as the paint's mixing. I think that really is because of the flow aid. So now, just to give you an appreciation, that's kind of the texture that I'm getting. It's not running like I would use in my airbrush. It's definitely holding together, but it's quite thin. Okay, so that's real quick and easy, one way that I mix paint. I also have used Vallejo's thinner rather than or matte medium rather than this stuff, and it works really well too. Actually, just for me, this stuff's cheaper, and it's in bulk. And I actually get all these Liquitex products at Michael's, by the way, if anybody's kind of wondering where you get them, because they're usually not carried at, I've not usually seen them at hobby shops typically, but you might, so who knows. So one of the things I do is I kind of just make sure right off the bat I'm not getting too much paint on there. This is going to be pretty obvious. I'm just going to basically just kind of get a first layer on here, not getting it too thick. As I said earlier, if you actually go with white or a gray, this will probably be easier. I'm probably going to have to put a bit of a thin coat on here even after this, just to Some of the black's going to show through, I'm pretty sure, because I used black. It just happened to be the spray can that I had. I don't normally use spray cans, I use the airbrush, as we've mentioned, and so I'm just kind of making do. A lot of times for this, if I do know I'm going to have to put a second coat, and I'm using, you know, I've thinned this down, I'll actually try to move the paint around specifically, not to get it too thick in one area. And this is kind of, for me, a bit of a sloppy process. Like, I'm not even that worried about getting it with this initial first color on the shield or the sword. I'm not going to purposely get it on there because, as we've said, you know, you can show through a little bit because your paints are clear, or they're transparent. They're not, to some degree, acrylic paints. But as you see here, I'm not that worried about getting on the rock. I'm going to be putting some Mechanicus gray over that. That shouldn't be a problem. Okay, I'm going to make sure that I get it into the eyes there. Ultimately, we'll have stages later that's going to darken all of this. So I do want to make sure that I'm getting paint in there. The other thing too you might notice is that when you thin paint, and particularly if you make a lot of it, not just a little bit to mix to begin with, you might notice, at least I do, that it actually thickens before your eyes. Like, as you're painting, the water evaporates and it starts to get thicker through the course of painting your mini. And so what I will normally do is add a little bit, either more of the matte medium or that water mixture, to just kind of counteract that. And so for me, it's really just takes experience just to kind of get it to where you want to, and even not over thinning it through that process that I just mentioned. In later stages, I'll be more concerned on brush control. But this part's really kind of easy because I'm slathering most of the model with one color. The other thing too is I do like to make sure I get into those cracks here, and one of the techniques that I use, a lot of this is just common sense, is when you actually load up your brush just a little bit, you let the gravity pull your paint into the cracks or the edges where it meets things. And then when you're using your next color, like the metal on the shield, you'll do the same from the perspective of the shield surface to the skeleton bone. And that will allow you to try to get into those cracks without getting paint everywhere when you're worried about getting paint everywhere. I actually find in later stages where you're painting details that actually is even more important for me. Okay, I'm just going to speed the camera up now and finish the rest of this piece off. Okay, so I'm back and just got my, I've got my first layer of base paint on here. In some cases it's not exactly perfect, but it's just really it's the main coat, and I'm going to be doing other stages later to put similar colors and lighten and darken. And so what I'll do now is I'll actually do the shield and the sword. And before I do that, off camera, I'm just going to do my other two skeletons. So I'll be right back with just painting this shield and the sword real quick. So now I've finished my other skeletons as far as the base paint goes, and I'm going to work on the shield and the sword blade. Now I'm actually using this lead belcher. Now this is an example of a metallic paint, and I just happen to know from experience I don't like to thin this one down. It's one of the ones I use straight out. Metallic paints are made a little bit differently, and they can be thinned, but and I actually will give you an example of one in the future that I will thin, but this one in particular I kind of like to apply just straight. I actually find that it's thin enough that it works well. So hey everybody, so I am back and I've now done the shield and sword for everybody. I'm going to be just doing the sword hilt real quick, but I wanted to show you the paint that I'm using, and I really like this paint. It's bronze. Despite really liking the lead belcher that I showed you and saying that I don't dilute it, I find this paint to be extremely thick and rich in pigment. It's a beautiful paint that I really enjoy using, but I do actually thin it down versus the lead belcher because of how thick it is. I'm just going to show you when it comes out what it looks like. And so if you look at it here, it's actually retaining its shape, sort of like almost like an oil paint. That's how thick it is. Like I can go like this and it doesn't even move. What I'll end up doing is putting a bit of this base medium in, the matte medium. And so when I mix that up, I've definitely now thinned it down a bit. It's still actually quite thick, and that's one of the things that I find the matte medium sometimes does, is it doesn't get it quite where I want to. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a drop of my solution of Liquitex Flow Aid, and I'm actually going to put it in one of the other wells here, as you can see. And what I'll do, this is a bit hard to do on camera, sorry. And I'm just going to get it on my brush and move it in here. And now, just going to put a little bit more. It's also kind of like a nice, in some ways it really cleans the brush up too. If you have some goopy paint that's drying on your brush, you just run it through that, it actually kind of takes the paint out. I found it's kind of a nice little thing. But if you look now, it's a really nice thin mixture, and so I don't really need that much of this. I'm actually going to use a different brush because I'm starting to get to some of the smaller stuff. But it's amazing how small you can do details though with a big brush if you've got a good point. But I'm going to use a fine brush for this part. I have a little bit too much on here. I'm going to use what I have already on there now. Move it around. So this is supposed to be bronze. It's not a bright gold. Sometimes what I like to do is use bronze as a base coat and either darken it for something that's going to be really weathered later through washes or whatever, or highlight it with gold so it gives it a good place to start, but then highlight it and brighten it up later. But I'm a big fan of the darker metallics as a base coat. Oops. So that's another thing I can probably bring up, is some people actually like to take paint pots, particularly like old GW pots, but and use some of the blue sticky stuff, and it actually helps keep your miniature up here, and you can manipulate it a bit more. I have done that, and sometimes it's helpful, but I'll be honest, I'm kind of lazy, and I still just use my fingers on a base most often. Not a lot of detail on this part of the model, this sword hilt and sword. Okay. So I will be back after I do the other swords. Hey everybody, so I'm back, and I did cheat a little bit. I actually did paint the leather straps and the rock, not on camera. And basically I used the same exact technique as thinning the others. I didn't really use much of the water, I just used some matte medium with these two, and that was the snakebite leather just for the leather straps and the Mechanicum gray for the rock. So now at this point where I am at with the model, this is the foundation in most cases of what I would say your mini's paint job is. I mean, in the sense that from here you can choose to go on and shade and highlight and do other kinds of special effects, various things. on the model to try to make it a little more realistic, more cartoony, just different things. But this is the foundational paint for your model to work with. In some cases, depending on the game that you're playing, if you have to do hundreds of these, some people might just leave it at like this. They might just say, this is good enough, you know, I just want to show that it's a skeleton and it's not just black or just white or whatever. I just want a little bit of detail. And so your base paint may be what some people call even tabletop standard if you had a few colors. And so, like all my other minis for the game, I'll be painting the base, in this case black. This won't be I won't be doing like a basing tutorial as part of this, because this is geared for the Wrath of Asharlan, or excuse me, the Castle Ravenloft minis, and I just do them black, like game pieces. So I hope that you enjoyed this, and I will be back with another video and for the next stage in painting this mini. Take care, everybody.